Can you hear me?
Who?
I'm just wondering when I should start, but I guess she'll tell me.
Recording sign is on now.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Okay,
good.
here we go. Here we go. I'm going. Okay. All right. Hello, everybody out there. I can't see you all. Welcome to. Hi, Connie. I won't say hi to everybody, but great to see you're out there. Welcome to the 24th annual Eastside Culture Crawl. I would first like to acknowledge that we are working and creating on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This is the first of 3 talking art conversations on creative resilience, which is being moderated by Carlyn Yandle. Carlyn is a Vancouver artist who draws on her previous experience as a journalist, as a newspaper journalist, to engage community. I now turn this over to you to introduce the artists on the panel. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks,
Hi.
Esther. Hi, everybody. Yeah, the creative resilience is the overall theme of this year's artist talks. We have 3 talks, and tonight we are grappling with the topic of pivoting in a pandemic. And to that end, we have 3 artists that all connect in to this theme, even though they have very distinct practices. We have Sára Molčan, Richard Tetro, and Dorothy Doherty. So thank you for agreeing to do this.
Nice to be here.
You're live. Just by way of an introduction, this is very short and unfair sort of summary of each, just to give some context for attendees. Starting with Dorothy. Dorothy paints out of Portside Studios and makes ceramics at the Shadbolt Art Center in Burnaby. And recently, she's been on a quest to discover the resilience of plants that survive in sparse environments, the so-called weeds in the cracks of sidewalks and building edges, which I think is a lovely piece of symbolism for this topic. Sára Molčan is grapples with this all-persuasive social media, just a very big, exciting, confusing topic, and all the power to you, Sára, for taking this one on. Recently, she's been making large-scale selfie paintings that address what she calls the careful curation of personas, and I want to delve into that deeper tonight. And finally, Richard Tetro is a prolific and well-known painter, printmaker, and muralist whose iconic work reflects his interest in the dynamic and transient nature of the urban landscape. So there's way more about you people, but I'm just encapsulating it just as a starting point. So we can. And I just want to talk a little bit about this term pivoting. It's already overused in 8 months. It's like, oh, we're sick of this term pivoting in a pandemic. But I like the Merriam-Webster definition in relation to basketball. And it says here, it's the act of stepping with one foot while keeping the other foot at its point of contact with the floor. And I like that. I was wondering if that resonated with you all. For me, it was about staying grounded in our practice while taking a step outwards, maybe another step, keep moving around and that grounding until one finds a clear path or a way forward. Does that resonate for anybody?
It resonates with me
I
in the way that when I'm looking at my work and I'm pivoting in terms of a viewpoint or a vantage point. So while not be moving forward, it's rather examining and experiencing the work through a different lens. So that's how I would resonate to that. It's that same idea of like, I haven't really moved, but the world has moved. So I'm looking at my work in a different manner.
Anybody else
Yeah.
want to weigh in on that?
Mhm. Yeah, the prism is definitely shifted in the last several months. And so it kind of turns one inward in a certain way. And so you're looking further into your work, I find, because pretty uninterrupted times in a lot of ways for creativity. And but at the same time, you keep your links open and your connections with friends in one way or another and your colleagues. So that's still happening, but in a really moderated way. So the onus is more on oneself, I think, in an introspective way to just get down to it and do the work. So that's what I found in the last, since March anyway, that really kicked into gear. And so, it's prolific, but it's pivoting because where is it all going, right? Big question.
Yeah, and I guess as a person who loves to get out in the world, my world changed. And, with isolation, I was no longer able to get out to exhibitions and other events, the studio and things like that. And I really just had to find out what life brought me as I either stepped out the door or was able to engage with people through electronic means and social media. So that's how it began for me.
Yeah, Dorothy, I really want to talk about this interest in these abject plants, or these plants that barely survive, as a topic. But I wanted to really acknowledge that your whole art practice, your life in art, seems to be a lot about pivoting. From the 20 years of teaching and working in ceramics in various communities in BC, and then getting your master's in art history, and then pivoting again to getting your professional development program certification so that you could teach, and then after retirement going back into the Capilano College University or Capilano University program, and then extending that to your art practice. Can you talk a little bit more about how that's worked for you, or how you made those decisions to do some of that work?
Oh, yes. Well, what you're looking at in terms of the image here is an image that's really, really important to me, and that's the weed horsetail. It's 12 million years old, and we forget that as we have had to adapt during the pandemic, these plants and weeds that are still with us today after millions of years have probably had to do the same thing, make changes, make adjustments. My change from employment to retirement is what gave me the time, the free time again to devote to a course of study. And I didn't really know that I wanted to go to Cap, but I think I do just about everything on impulse. The big decisions in my life are very quick and very certain. And went to Cap. I didn't enroll in the right program first time off, but I looked around and I saw what I wanted. So I actually enrolled in the studio arts program. And quite frankly, if the government hadn't have shut it down in 2014, I think I'd still be there. I love going to art schools. Is that?
Yeah, no, that totally answered my question. And it brings up that you mentioned an important point, that sometimes it's not, a master plan that you've set out for yourself. It's an instinct, or it's just, as you said, like a sort of an impulsive move, or just a hunch to go in a certain direction. And I wonder how many other people feel that they are moving towards part of the pivoting is about moving towards your hunch, as opposed to moving towards some kind of conscripted plan.
Yeah, well, for me, I could say that actually some of the themes of my studio work have been about rudderless ships and kind of things that just sort of drift with the current, because it's kind of how I felt a lot of the time in the last several months anyway. But at the same time, I'm really motivated to create and to be engaged in the process of it. So without necessarily knowing where it's all headed, I guess more than usual, let's put it that way. I mean, I always work whether it's going somewhere or not, literally, physically. But the things that I am missing and I think Dorothy kind of touches on that, is that there's certain kind of engagement that I'm used to doing particularly in the spring and summer around Vancouver's my community mural projects, and that's not possible. However, I did get a commission to do a private mural, which is the one you see on the screen here, in somebody's courtyard, as I realized that sitting through pandemic times that they were looking at just a plain wall that could be decorated and changed up. And so some friends recommended me for the job, and they really loved it. And it was quite a step out of their comfort zone to commission a 2-story high, undersea world kind of phantasmical vertical frieze. So that was a lot of fun. It only took me 8 or 10 days or so to complete it, but it was really enjoyable to do that. But that's different than my collaborations where I'm working with a whole bunch of people. So this was like a solo mural project that I haven't done that many of in the last number of years. They've been mostly large scale, with 20 or 30 or 40 people from a community. So that's been a real shift. There haven't been really a whole lot of mural projects, but that one was a lot of fun to work on in midsummer.
And is that the first one you've done in a private residence? Like that would only be sort of.
Pretty much, actually. Yeah, I've done a lot in housing projects and downtown Eastside and community centers and all of that. But yeah, private, as far as private commissions, it's a bit unusual and really came out of the blue. But yeah, they were a little bit wary because I think they didn't know what an artist really was like to deal with. So they were kind of leapt into the unknown themselves. But it was encouraging to see the kind of response that they got on it. And I think that just them watching the whole process was pretty illuminating as well. Yeah. So
you've opened up a whole new path for you.
It could be, I mean, it's kind of fun doing your own thing in a lot of ways. It's definitely nice working in a garden. Can't do that for an environment. It's very different from so many of them are downtown Eastside and really intense street scene and kind of a whole, evolutionary dynamic in developing ideas and working with community. So that's something that every year up till now, the last 20 or 30 years has been happening, and this year not. So that's been really a difference for me, and along with not teaching workshops and that as well.
And that the collaboration features so big in your whole art practice, and it immediately came to my mind, how is Richard going to deal with this lack of physical?
Telling me something. Maybe it's telling me it's time to shift gears and work in a different way, or kind of engage in a different way and still work large, but through different channels. So I'm always open to different options and opportunities. So I guess like Dorothy says, it's like you just get a gut instinct and go with it. So
Sára,
that's what artists do anyway, generally.
Yeah. Sára, do you work that way as well? Like start with a gut instinct, or do you have some artists, people work differently. Some have a very clear path how they're going to move forward. Do you follow impulse or?
It's a bit of both. So I'm definitely a hyper planner. I like to plan out entire series and storylines throughout my work. But when an opportunity presents itself, I will act on impulse. So that includes throughout the pandemic. So I was planning for a 2020 show at the beginning of the pandemic for the summer. That's now been postponed to 2021. And that caused me or gave me the opportunity to kind of evaluate the work I was working on, some of which is behind me, and potentially take that in a slightly different direction. And it also gave me this opportunity to reevaluate my previous work, one of which is on the screen right now, and look at it through a different lens, where we're kind of obligated to exist in a virtual space now, instead of just it could be optional before. Like it was something you could opt out of. And now with the way things have progressed, it's almost obligatory. Like there's just no escape from it. So I've definitely leaned into addressing some of it in my now 2021 show. So of following a little bit of those impulses and need to change things, even though that it goes against usually everything that I would do. So I'm just like way too much of a hyper planner to normally follow an impulse. But sometimes it's good to let go.
Yeah. And what is it John Lennon said? Come on, Richard might know, Dorothy. What life happens when people are making
happens to you while you're busy making other plans.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now we're speaking of sort of this virtual world. Sára, still on to you. I can't imagine you were already in this space, grappling with this space of social media and virtual life. And you're saying you're sort of revisiting some of that work. Can you go into that a little further? Like, how are you re-examining it because of, during the time of the pandemic?
Right. So the piece that was on the screen before has a K Flay lyric that says, "Reading through your messages is my favorite way to die." And initially, when I chose those words for that piece, it was more about clinging to a relationship that had failed and reading through the messages on repeat. But looking at it through the lens of the pandemic, it, for me, reads more like I have no choice but to read through messages. And it's like Zoom fatigue. Like it's that virtual death because all you can do is exist through text or through video chat or in some virtual realm. And it becomes takes on a life of its own in some ways. So in looking through my older work, it's kind of given me this opportunity to think, well, if I were to plunk these same pieces into our current reality, like how do they read? Like what experience am I now bringing to the work that I wasn't bringing to them in 2019 or in 2018? So it gives us a little bit of a different viewpoint and vantage point when you're looking at your own work. And that's been really interesting.
Mm-hmm. I would think that it seems like I don't know how to quite put this into words, but the generation of work is sort of shortening because things are changing so fast. That work that you might reflect on that you've done 5 years ago is work that you're now reflecting that you've done 6 months ago. But the time for reflection and revisiting work is getting shorter and shorter. Does anybody? Is that just?
Yeah, no, I feel that. It sometimes feels like you're standing still and some things haven't changed for you, but the world is spinning around you. And so there's this strange concept with time now, this relationship where something simultaneously feels like 3 years ago and yesterday, both at the same time. And you're like, but that was what?
Yeah.
Like when you think about everything that's even just happened in 2020 so far, it's hard to think that we're not 5 years from the starting point, but it was also, 7 months ago, but also yesterday or last week. So
yeah. Does anybody else feel that?
Yeah, it's definitely everything's a time warp for sure. But as far as engagement, like there's this sort of a lack of grounding, I think, through in the visual arts by the whole thing of going to galleries and going to openings, all that sort of, I think it gives artists a lot of a sense of where they are in the universe in a way. I mean, it's kind of integral to our activity, but that's really been cut off. So, or not entirely, but largely been cut back. So yeah, so you have to make your own sort of sense of time and where you fit in the space. And yeah, it's an enigmatic time for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think anybody can quite put their finger on it, because unless you've been through an epidemic or a pandemic and been isolated like this, or I don't know, maybe been off on an island isolated for years, a year on end, and maybe have some idea, or a sailor or something. I don't know. I keep reading these books about people who, go on adventures for long periods of time, because I think it sort of correlates to where we're at, in a lot of ways. We're sort of on our own adventure, right? So, I mean, keeping journals is an interesting thing, because I think it gives a bit of a grounding for me anyway, both writing journals about day-to-day stuff, just because it seems so otherwise so nebulous, and also sketchbooks, which I kind of chronically do anyways, but even more so, like just recording, kind of almost just writing things down, what happened today, what I did today. Helps, enunciating it helps to put it into some sort of a chronology, which in turn helps give it some sort of substance, which otherwise it might not have. It's my way of combating, the ambiguity of the times is journals and I mean, art making is kind of like chronology in a certain way too. I always tend to see it that way, that it's really kind of like your visual journals, is the way I approach it in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
And Dorothy, you were saying when the pandemic hit that you started to do these kind of, I don't know if ritual is the right word, but you started to do these regular walks right around where you could walk when it was right during the big lockdown. Is that something you're still doing, or was that a way to put some mark time in your daily life at all, or?
I think it was a way to mark time. And it was also a way for me to I live in a very small space, and, cabin fever is real. I didn't get there because I think the way I looked at it was, okay, this is happening and I'm going to live in it, and I'm going to I'm going to learn something new. This is a new reality for me. And so going out every morning with my cell phone camera, I would take photos of everything that interested me, and that was everything from something that was growing, something that was changing, insects, live things, dead things, and then I would post it on Instagram. Oh yeah, this is something else that I came across. These are daylilies, and the thing about daylilies is that they have the plant itself is a pretty invasive plant with large green growth. Now, this is kind of just to let you know how I approached this. Is before the plant was producing flowers, I actually dug it up out of the ground and started looking at the root structure and putting the root structure in jars of water, and then observing that. And then it came to the point where these started to bloom, and it was a surprise to me, actually. I knew nothing about them, that they would bloom for one day, and then the petals would fall off. And so I started picking the petals up off the ground, and at one point I realized that they touched something and they produced a dye. So then I went on and decided to replicate the dye, and that's what you're seeing here in front of you. The daylily blossoms, when they dry, they start to twist, and the dye that was produced are on the bottom layer, I carried that forward into some drawings that I did as well, and so I basically followed my nose. I didn't have a real plan. This is from the walks that I took, and if there was something that I could continue to follow, I did. And I think it's really was a very interesting time for me. Otherwise, I just would have been scurrying around the city, driving here, driving there, driving to the studio, cafes, meeting friends, So it's a very, very different time.
So it sounds like all three of you are saying that you know, the shutdown that was quite horrifying in the beginning. It was like, is this the apocalypse? And everything was closed down and there was nobody in the streets. But it sounds like all three of you are saying that this was also maybe a pause and a chance to reflect. Sára, I'm not sure if I got that off of you, but I'm just assuming just because
Definitely a pause. Yeah, there was that moment to reflect on like everything. It was definitely, I was in the camp of people that when we first got the notice, I was like, yeah, 2 weeks, like we got this. 2 weeks isn't too bad. And then it's like 3 days into that 2 weeks and they're like, so 3 months. And then you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be for the foreseeable future. And it just, that date has been pushed back and pushed back. And wearing a mask is second nature now. And being like existing in any sort of space, just it almost feels strange remembering what we were doing before in some ways, because it's almost been like this minute where we've settled in to this new normal. And one day that might not be the case and we'll be like, remember that time that we like wore masks like everywhere? But it definitely has given me time to reflect, but also like viewing people's reactions through social media has been like a great source of inspiration for my work. So there's been just seeing the way that people have handled themselves, or the way that the like relationships have evolved, for both negative and positive throughout social media. So it's been interesting for me, and there was that pause and reflect moment for sure.
And as somebody who really is using that as your study area, social media, have you noticed shifts in, or I know you have, can you just share some of the shifts that you've noticed that's happening through social media?
Well, I mean, social media is the highlight reel, but what's been interesting about the highlight reel is that there's been a bit of a pivot into highlighting very specific vulnerable moments. So everything's curated still, but there's these a bit more vulnerability being shared, a bit less of just the happiness, but like a carefully selected sad moment is also now making the rounds. So it's because it's not any secret that this is traumatizing for so many people. And so we're all dealing with so much in ourselves, and so to pick one specific moment makes a lot of sense. So you don't really need to or want to even share that much vulnerability with other people. So I would say, yeah, there's been this bit of a shift for the highlight reel. There's people are being more open about their feelings and how the pandemic has affected them in negative ways as well.
And can you talk a little bit about this image that's being shared right now?
Yeah, this is a piece dealing with that relationship and kind of difficult event that can occur when somebody sees somebody that you used to date with somebody new. And just that conversation that ensues from that. So, you know, does it matter? No, like it shouldn't, but it does. Like that those text conversations are still happening, but it's all happening in like the virtual realm. So that's been fascinating to watch as people try to form new relationships or salvage relationships that weren't going to work through something like this.
And it's definitely, it sounds like we need to renegotiate relationships. When Richard, you're talking about like, you know, part of your relationships was meeting your friends at galleries and in the studio, and all of a sudden, and Dorothy, you were saying the same, that you have to kind of, I guess, adjust to the fact that these relationships that depended on the same physical space are just having to be put on the back burner right now. And does the Zoom reality, the virtual reality, of relationships affect your work at all?
Well, for me, I mean, the Zoom thing doesn't quite replace the actual, right? So, or the in-person. So I really do actually miss the classes, like teaching classes at Malaspina, for example, where I'm a member. And I usually every year I teach a few classes there, and different workshops in the islands and the Gulf Islands and such. So that's a kind of a way of getting out and also engaging with people. And I learn a lot from those as well, because usually it's working with other artists. They're not all like younger, just beginning students. They're all usually have some kind of a practice happening in their own direction. And so there's a lot of symbiosis going on in those workshops. So that's one thing that's kind of really gone on the back burner. As far as, yeah, openings and such go, I don't know when I was last at an actual opening. I guess we went to the VAG and kind of had masks on, and it was sort of like everybody on a scheduled time, to visit. So you get the experience of looking at art, but you don't get the whole other aspect of it. It's double-edged sword, because on the other hand, you don't have to spend a bunch of your time going out in the evening and kind of going to events. You can go in the studio and you can work. So that's the other side to it, right? I mean, it really has been a huge, for me, very prolific time. I mean, initially, as soon as COVID struck, I realized I had this huge drawer of paper that I'd gotten from somewhere. Some artist had given it to me, and I just started doing these enormous drawings, kind of on these natural forms, from drawings from Haida Gwaii and shorelines and such. And that became one of my themes that I've been carrying on with for the last 6 months or so. But just having that time to every day do a new piece. I mean, I think I did, I don't know, 40 drawings or something, one after the other. I mean, you really evolve by that kind of uninterrupted time. It's a lovely thing, as much as it can be at times disorienting. But the art always kind of gives me a grounding. So you can see how messy my studio is here in this photograph.
Your walls look pristine, though.
What's that?
Your walls look pretty pristine there. They're pretty. I figured there would be more slops of paint on the actual wall. You're organized.
Well,
organized chaos.
It's mostly on the floor, because I paint on the floor a lot, actually, flat on the ground. And every now and then I throw some white paint over the walls, because it gets too distracting. Yeah, it's not always that clean. So then there's one painting there that's a Mexican theme piece. I did kind of 2 versions, and that's an interesting COVID story, just to segue into that. Just soon after COVID struck, a friend of mine was going to go with his family to Mexico. And so I give him some information about places and murals and things to see in Mexico City and all of that. And then after COVID, he wasn't going anywhere. So his family was very disappointed. So he came over, he gave me a bottle of wine, and I gave him a book on Diego Rivera, who he didn't really know Diego Rivera. So I said, just have a look at this. This is like a consolation for not going to Mexico. So he got back to me after a few days, and he said, you know what, my wife just loves the colors of that guy's work. And it's like, there's this painting that we'd love to have, but it's like $14 million in auction and so So I don't think that's really at the cards, but maybe you can do something with all your drawings, and I'll surprise her with it, right? So this is a painting that I did. It's about 4 by 6 feet, pretty good size. And the idea was it was like a slice of a mural almost, like a fresco-like feeling to it, but saturated colors, very different from the shoreline pieces I was working on. But I said, that's a really interesting challenge. It's a segue, kind of a very about face from what I was working on. But I love Mexico, and I love the colors and obviously the gestures and everything, the figures. So I took sketchbook drawings and extrapolated that into a composition. And I included Diego Rivera. He's a figure down in the bottom corner behind the flowers playing an accordion, which I don't even think he played accordion, but I made him play an accordion in the piece. It's like a tribute to Rivera, who I obviously love. And it's very influential in my evolution as a mural painter. So it gave me a chance to do a tribute piece. And of course, he put it on the wall and surprised his wife, and she was quite thrilled with it all. And so it was a really nice trajectory that ran over several months actually of the summer, where I worked on this piece, and we kind of compare notes about it. Really a commission, but one where I had a lot of free reign to explore something that I loved already, thematically. So yeah, that was one of my one of my COVID projects, I call it, along with a mural that you saw previously.
So it doesn't seem like you've really suffered much during this pandemic. I mean, aside from the horribleness of the pandemic and all its impact, but yourself, for your art practice, I mean.
Yeah, I can't say that I really have suffered that much. I mean, I have the luxury of a good sized studio, and have some good friends that I've remained in contact with, and kind of outdoors up till now. Now that the weather's changed, who knows what? But we've been having outdoor get-togethers and sharing a bottle of wine and like that. So that's how you get through a pandemic, as far as I can figure. I don't know. Never done it before. Making it up. And social media, does, get back to that. It does give another channel for things. So, I mean, just recently, thanks to the crawl, I've been playing around with Matterport, doing 3-dimensional studio vistas. So it's a pretty awesome little device that architects use a lot to show spaces, for architectural tours. But being able to, put up in a virtual way one studio, in the interior of one studio, so that people can online kind of walk through it, is an interesting device. So, I guess never too old to learn a few tricks.
Well, I think the innovation is a sort of a key aspect of the artist, right? So
yeah, I'm not really a techno person particularly at all. I mean, I'm kind of the opposite. I carve wood blocks and do things that are very hands-on, and not engaging with technology as an intermediary very much, but as a way to get the work out there after it's done. It's really interesting. It's like interesting to see how Instagram and Facebook images can get out there.
And Dorothy, do you find that what's your relationship with social media or the virtual world at this point? Are you hiding from it? Are you embracing it? How's it affecting your art practice?
For a while there, I was an addict.
Oh.
Yes, I had actually a couple of days, I'd booked myself into 5 or 6 Zoom events in a day, and I suddenly realized that I was getting exhausted. But I did take a writing workshop earlier on in the pandemic, and sort of the spring side of it. And some of the writing that I did, I addressed this sort of a thing about Zoom and in my life, and I came to a really interesting realization, which most of you probably don't need to work so hard at understanding it, but it came to me as though I loved it so much, I learned so much, and yet the image that we were looking at is an image, it's not the real person, and what's missing is the energy that we create when we're together with someone else. You probably know what I mean. If you're if you're face to face with somebody, you light up. And we don't do that on Zoom. Well, we kind of do if we really know the people. Because I have a group of 4 friends, and we meet quite often on Zoom, and it is kind of a neat thing to see them. But it isn't the same as being with them. And I know that because we've met several times outside, and there's a different energy and being right beside another human being. That's how I see it.
And getting back to what we were talking about before in terms of relationships, and galleries, visiting galleries or exhibiting your work, are you feeling a loss of that as well? Or I guess that's part of our social life as artists, is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
for sure. Well, I've had, I guess, every possible kind of experience this year. I was in a number of group exhibitions at the beginning of the year, and every one of them was canceled, and then slowly they became available online, and that's okay. And the galleries did a great job of presenting the work, and I think we all learned a lot from that experience. But I was also scheduled to have an exhibition at the Zach Gallery with 5 artist friends who did similar work. And the curator there ran into a bit of a problem in how to present it online. So what she did was hung the show, took a video of it, and then it was just at the time when people were opening their galleries for visits to the gallery by appointment. And so from the beginning of July to the beginning of September, I was actually in an exhibition that was hung. There probably wasn't a huge attendance because there was no opening. We did interviews online, but it was a little glitchy. It was still really nice, and I really appreciate that experience. But people were just learning all the time through this whole experience, and that I think that was great. It was really, really good to see the show hung after not having a show all year. It was really good to see it and to be right up there, right beside the work. I have another exhibition that was postponed until next year. So, but I'm really grateful for all the opportunities, and it's all part of learning.
Sára, have you learned any new learnings?
I mean, it is that, like, going back to what I said earlier about how being in the digital world became an obligation rather than a choice. I will echo what Richard and Dorothy have said, which is that it doesn't replace that physical connection. It doesn't replace that physical intimacy that you get when you actually get to see your friends or your family in person. There's this disconnect because you are just looking at an image. And I think what also is really interesting is that I really appreciate all the galleries who put everything online and the crawl being online, but it really will never replace seeing that work in person. There's some things that just won't translate through a screen, whether it's the scale of the work, the texture of the work, like standing in front of work and having it like dwarf you because it's so big, like some of Richard's work, like you don't get that same visceral experience when you're looking at work through a screen. Like you can show scale and you can show different aspects that way, but it's not tangible the same way. So being a millennial and existing online for so much of my life, it was kind of this awareness of how often we've taken those experiences for granted, that ability to, stand in the Vancouver Art Gallery, be swallowed by a painting because it is so big and it's taking up the whole wall, and really getting to experience the work and the chills you get when you really connect with a piece of work, or lighting up, like, when you see your friends, it's so different when there's this separation and you're experiencing everything through a screen. And for me, even though I deal with like augmented reality, so you look at my work through a screen, more stuff pops up, it's all so digital, that experience doesn't exist the same way without the community around you. So one of the more exciting things that happened pre-pandemic was I had an exhibition and all these strangers got together to teach each other how to use the technology to see the augmented reality by looking at my work through their phones. And that's just not an experience where you can get that close to a bunch of people you don't know anymore. So it's just, it lacks that. it's that moment was so magical, and I almost wish that I could like hold on to it. And it's like taking it for, it almost feels like I took it for granted in the moment. And so it's been a lot of those learnings where things seemed so natural and like they'd always be available. And
Mhm.
now they're absolutely not.
Right. And hopefully not forever. But
Yes, yeah.
I noticed with just the masks, was never aware of all the micro expressions that we share in face-to-face communication until you put a mask on, and I can't read people at all. Yeah. So I guess that's what I'm looking for is, do we have a sense of optimism for your practices going forward? Has this Is this moving your work in a new direction permanently, or is this just an interlude and then you'll return? Or is it one of those things where once you learn something, you can't
think
go
it's a
backwards?
combination, at least for me. It's both an interlude and both taking something from this period and bringing it with me to where my practice was going already. So I'm able to take the experiences that I'm having right now and translate them through my work, but also having this opportunity to really like hold on to future moments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does it set the stage for anybody else this time? Is
Mm,
that too broad of a
I think
question?
anything we go back to is going to be so different from what it was before, you know? I really do. So we can kind of, I don't think anything makes sense. It doesn't make sense to go back, to think about going back to the same thing. It's not going to be that. What it is anybody's guess really at the moment. I think the art scene is kind of taking a hit right now, but you know, hopefully bounce back in some way, shape or form, but it'll probably be reinventing itself, I think.
Yeah, I think we have to be optimists as artists, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to think that there's a reason we're doing it, and it's it's purpose. Mm-hmm. In terms of the collaboration, Richard, I imagine that you're missing that, and you'd be looking forward to
Yeah,
returning to that.
definitely. In some way or other, I would really like that to happen again, but you know, I don't foresee that in the next year or so. I mean, maybe something will happen next spring and summer. I really don't know. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
predicting, you know, I'm not totally optimistic that it's going to be opening up by next summer.
Right.
And most of my community engaged projects happen, right?
And when you actually do your murals, I mean, you're in this physical same space as a lot of people. I think I've walked by one of your murals when there was a lot of people in the same. There
Yeah.
would not be social distancing.
No, not really.
Yeah. So
No.
we hope that happens. I was hoping that there would be some questions from our attendees. Don't see too many questions, but if anyone has any, I would love to present them to the artists. Anything at this point that you would like to share, artists, on for the sake of the attendees, about your work going forward? I'd love to hear about it.
I can talk about what I'm doing for the crawl. So I'll actually be live painting throughout the crawl. So this is something I do every year, but it'll be different because it'll be through a screen. But I am going to be spending 45 minutes all 8 days live painting. So I've got the schedule on my crawl page so that people can tune in and see a work come all the way through the different stages. So I'll be starting 2 new works during the crawl.
That's exciting. Dorothy, Richard?
Well, I'm not doing any of the social media during the crawl. My studio is closed, and maybe it'll give me a chance to tune in to other artists I'm looking forward to that.
It is a great opportunity to investigate other people. If you're used to being sort of having your studio open and receiving a lot of people, this could be the year that you can start to look at other people's work for a change.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, usually it's pretty busy much of the time, so they're not really an opportunity to be for me to actually be working on something. But this time around, I think I will just be working on some wood prints or something, which everybody finds interesting, you know, seeing a process like that happening. So I think that's what I'll do during the 8 days, is work on a couple of wood blocks and get the press happening. And so people can see that, because if there's only, you know, 6 or 8 people maximum in the studio at any time, then they can watch what's happening, right? Yeah.
It's like a different experience, but sorry, I jumped on you.
No.
I was just going to say it's you know, it's different, but maybe yeah, more of a new perspective, in fact, for as an artist. I know the crawl can be quite grueling normally.
Yeah, well, the endless talking, right? So I mean, at the end of the 4 days, which it traditionally is the 4 days, all the artists are totally like talked out and a little bit incoherent by the end of it. But this time around, I think they'll be spread out more, so it'll be kind of more opportunity for personal contacts with people. So I hope people get out and visit, you know, and visit studios and see what other artists are doing, and yeah, and get engaged in that way. Because it's one of the few opportunities that are out there for visual arts these days, and it's a good one. Yeah.
I think that was all my questions that I had for everyone. I think I can sum it up by, I don't know if it's fair, but I think I'm encouraged by the kind of reflections that you've all been sharing tonight, because it encourages me, because it makes me realize the important role of the artist in uncertain times. That not only do we find a way to respond to this time, we will do anything to respond to something so big as a pandemic. We'll just find a way, because we need to find a way. I'm getting that from all three of you, and I hope you agree with that. I see your work is shifting, and I think it's shifting in a way that seems really encouraging.
I see that there's a question to all artists. What was the most positive takeaway from this experience for your work so far? So I can answer that first, because I just happened to notice it in the chat here. The most positive takeaway is that it's just so important to take those little moments and really cherish them. So all of the time that I used to schedule for the studio, I really like honor every minute that I can spend in it now, being so far away from my space. So that's been the most positive takeaway, is to not take things for granted, and to maybe just sometimes slow down. So that's, for me, I learned more positive behaviors around my practice.
Nice pivot.
Yeah, I would say I'm with Sára there. Go down. Oh, sorry. Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay, sorry. I'm with Sára there. I'm learning to observe everything, move a little slower, think a little more, and really enjoy everything. I find a big container of rice fell off the top shelf of my kitchen onto the kitchen floor. Turn that one into something fun, like, you know, a waterfall of rice, or, you know, you know, I mean, turn it into something fun. And I haven't been depressed yet, or or any of the things that a lot of other people have told me about. So I'm hoping that that angle of observation of life and appreciation of life is getting me through.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that we're very fortunate to have a means, a vehicle that allows us to, experience an augmented kind of reality just by nature of what we do. So kind of building on that every day, that's a meaningful enough thing. You don't have to necessarily extrapolate it going much further than that. Doing the work is one thing, and then what you do with it afterwards is another. But right at the moment, it's good enough to just be doing the work.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to let go of what's going to happen to this work because nobody knows. So you can just concentrate on the work.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have another question from Sandy. Given all that you have said thus far, have any of you thought of the long-term impacts on your creativity if the pandemic should continue for another year or longer?
Ooh.
Yeah, I've definitely considered different ways of potentially exploring creativity. Working with augmented reality in my practice at least gives me a digital outlet when I can't physically be in my space. It is draining in different ways. So I do think about what the long-term impact is going to be in terms of whether or not physical shows could happen. So a lot of the times it's financial implications, which can make it a lot harder to create rather than impacting your creativity itself. So you have to come up with unique and new ways to do things without a source of income coming in from your practice.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I would agree with that. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was okay for a month or two, and then I began to really worry about how to pay the rent. I don't get CERB or any of those perks, and I'm talking now about studio rent. And oddly enough, the government dropped enough free cash into my bank account that I could actually add a little bit to it and pay the rent. So I'm okay for this year. Next year is going to be different because I don't think the government's going to be quite as free with their money, and I'll have to come out with new strategies. But so far so good.
1 year at a time.
Yes.
Richard?
1 year at a time sounds like a good plan, or a few months at a time, I'd say. It actually works for me. Yeah, I mean, it's just impossible to predict, so I'm not going to try to. It's just keep working and keep channels open and opportunities open when they come up, and try to pursue some of them that are doable at the moment. And yeah, just be open to improvisation, I think, is a big part of it, which is essentially, I think, what artists do anyway. So, it's kind of are getting challenged by that more and more. That's what's happening.
Yeah. And on that note, I think that we should wrap it up. I want to thank you three for participating and really sharing elements of your practice.
All right.
Nice. And before you go, I want to thank you all, Carlyn and Dorothy and Richard and Sára. It was incredibly insightful. And we have several more conversations upcoming, one tomorrow night and one on Thursday. I also realized I'm become a product of Zoom, and I didn't introduce myself at the top of this. So I'll just say I'm Esther Rosenberg, and I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the Eastside Culture Crawl Society. And of course, pivoting is very much on my mind every second of the day, and has been since March the 12th. So the crawl as we know it is going to look really quite differently from previous incarnations. And I do hope that for those of you who are on this conversation, that you will come out and visit the artists in their studios. we are going, the crawl is really all about connecting, the artists with the public, and the dialogue and the exchange and the conversation. And we're going to miss some of that, as much as, Richard says at the end of it all, we're like pretty incoherent. I think we're going to miss a lot of the conversations that we've had over the years, and the exchanges and experiences that we've had. So anyway, really appreciate that you have come out this evening, and hope that you can both either join us again tomorrow night or Thursday, and also come and visit some of the studios which are going to be open, or visit them virtually. So on that note, I guess we'll just say good night, and many of you might be going back to election results. The only time I'll mention
Definitely.
that this evening.
Come out on the culture crawl. Come and visit.
Definitely. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.